You're listening to a recent message from Gateway Church. We trust that this will leave you inspired to chase after God and live a life sold out for Jesus.
All right, let's talk a little bit about generational strongholds then. Numbers 13 and 14, I think, is a pretty good example of this. There were 10 spies that infected a whole nation. They spread bad reports, they exchanged the truth for a lie, they grumbled, they had false perception, they had contempt for God, they opened themselves up to fear and rebellion. And of course, the curse that comes on, when that happens, you bring a curse on your family up to the third and fourth generation. So how does Satan infect a whole generation? So let's have look at a few scriptures. In Numbers 13 at verse 23, it says, when they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. It took 2 people to carry a pole between them because the grapes were so huge. Can you imagine how big that was? 2 people with a pole between them carrying all of the fruit on it, and they took some pomegranates and figs as well. Well, they got home to Moses, these spies, and they reported to them and to the whole assembly, and they showed them the fruit of the land. It was amazing. It was everything that God said it would be. And in verse 27, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is the fruit. And verse 28, here is the fruit. But, everybody say but. But, here's the tumor on the brain. But, this is where the lying began. And they began to layer lie upon lie upon lie because they were actually under a generational curse. How can you say that? Well, let's keep reading and I'll show you. In verse 30 it says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up. We can take possession of the land because we can certainly do it. Here's Caleb. He had seen Moses come back from the desert. He had seen Moses with his staff perform 10 plagues and miracles in Egypt. He'd seen Moses lead the people out of Egypt. He'd seen Moses hold his staff over the Red Sea. He'd seen the Red Sea part. He'd watched them all go through. That God sent them food from heaven. He sent them manna from heaven. And he had seen the hand of God. And so Caleb said, based on his experience, he said, we can do this. If God can do all of that, what more can he do for us? And he stood up and the people, we should go, we should take possession of the land, for we can certainly do that. Verse 31. But the men who had gone up with him, the other 10, said, we can't attack these people. They are stronger than us. What is wrong with these people? They have just seen the Red Sea open up. They have just seen amazing miracles. They have just seen an amazing deliverance. And here they are. They've got a tumor on their brain. They were slaves for 400 years. They were in bondage for 400 years. And they can't get out of their thinking as a slave. You see, as a slave, there is no way that they can go out, that they can experience freedom. And so they're locked into the past. They're locked into the culture of the past generations. And because of that, they're saying, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report. Now, this bad report, they gave it to one person. Johan, I need you again. Thank you. Cool. All right. There's one person, all right? And then, they took it to another person, build it. All right? Then they took it to another person. Now, what's happening here to the stronghold? This is not just individual. This is a whole nation, okay? And this is generational, what's happening here. And they kept spreading the lie. We're slaves. We can't do it. We've been in bondage for 400 years. We can't do this. We're nothing. We're nobody. There's no way that God will do this. They've forgotten all the good things about this, and they're just building this. And so the tumor now is this big. All right? Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Give it up for Johan. And they spread a bad report among the Israelites about the land they had explored, and they said, the land we explored devours those living in it. Oh my gosh, where did they get this from? Reminds me of my great aunts and all of their godless myths. all the people we saw there were of great size. See, this is a slave talking. This is not a free man talking. This is a slave talking. We saw the Nephilim, or giants there, the descendants of Anak, who were giants, come from Nephilim. Listen to this. We seemed, not a fact. This is perception, and it's distorted. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Whose eyes? In God's eyes? No. In Moses' eyes? No. In the eyes of the people? No. In their own eyes, because they were slaves and they were bound, they were imprisoned in their thinking of slavery. And here they're saying, we're like grasshoppers in our own eyes. You see, Caleb saw the miracles. He believed by faith. He believed we should go and we can do it. You know, it's just like out here 10 years ago, we started to sow the vision. We can do it. This church was in debt when we came, and it got out of debt really, really fast because everybody joined us and everybody became generous and everybody started to give and everybody started to work together. And that was awesome. And now, 10 years later, we've had people come and go through here. And they've laughed at us. They said, never happened. Oh, look at them. They're just small. They're grasshoppers. That's what they've said. They've come and gone. We've had so many people come and go through this church. They come and go through every church because they're pot plants and they're not plants. You know, a pot plant, you just pick it up and move it, pick it up and move it, pick it up and move it. They're just for decoration. The roots don't go down and they don't produce fruit. And they've come through this church and they've said they're just grasshoppers. Well, the grasshoppers are done pretty good, hey? 10 years and it's happening. It's out there. It's going to happen. 10 spies still in slave mode. They had distorted perception. They were in bondage to their past. They didn't see themselves as victorious. They forgot about Moses' rod. They forgot about the plagues. They forgot about the miracles. They forgot about the Red Sea. They even forgot that the Egyptian army, the whole Egyptian army, was drowned in the Red Sea when it came back over them. They were on the shore and they saw the waves coming back over the whole of the Egyptian army. The whole army was destroyed and it was drowned. That's what they saw. But they couldn't see that because of the tumor on their brains. They were limited by their generations of slavery, of fear and rejection. All they could say was, I can't. Can do. There's got to be a way. And I might not have worked out the way, but there's got to be a way. God, nothing's impossible with you. There's got to be a way. But with them, in their vocabulary, they were locked into the word can't. And they were locked into passing on bad reports. You know, they listened to the bad report. And then not only did they listen to the bad report, but they passed it on. And that's what happens when you listen to a bad report. If you don't go to the Father and if you don't find out what the truth is, you will exchange the truth for a lie, and this is what will happen to you. And what you pass on will not be the truth. What you pass on will be a lie, and there will be a generational curse on it. Be careful to listening to negativity. Take it to the Father. Now, I am not so naive to think that sometimes there's not a grain of truth in it. Go to the Father and ask him, God, speak to me. And when he speaks to you, do something really novel. Do something that God told all of the prophets to do. Write it down, because I guarantee you will forget it. You will forget it in the busyness of life. You will forget what God has spoken to you. And God said to all of the prophets, write it down. Now, if they were disobedient and they didn't write it down, would we have the Bible today? Oh, God, I don't need to write that down. Imagine John on the island of Patmos. Oh, I get lost, God. Yeah, great vision, but I'm not writing it down. What about Daniel? Oh, whoa. Oh, I'm not going to take the time to write that down. What about Jeremiah? Every time he wrote, the king tore it up and threw it in the fire. And then he had to write it again and again and again. Down. If the prophets had to write it down, we have to write it down. I have to write it down. I have to go back and read what God has spoken to me to remind me. It said that David encouraged himself in the Lord. David wrote the Psalms. If he was not obedient and he didn't write them down, would we have them today? No, we wouldn't have them today. He was obedient. And I guarantee that when he had to encourage himself, he took those Psalms that he had written and he read them and he confessed them and he declared them until he got from under the circumstances till on top of the circumstances. Don't pass on a bad report. They talked about being devoured, and it will devour you. They talked about how big the problem was, how they were giants and how they were grasshoppers in comparison. But you know what? I've got a big God. In myself, I'm a grasshopper. But in Jesus Christ, I am not a grasshopper. So what do slaves do? Let's go on to Numbers 14. Slaves grumble. Because you see, they're slaves. They can't solve any problems. They have a master. And so what do? They grumble. And it says here in Numbers 14, verse 2, all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and they said to each other, oh, this is a novel idea. We should choose a leader and go back. Go back where? Go back to slavery. Go back to bondage. What a novel idea. Who's speaking to them? They've exchanged the truth for a lie. And they're imprisoned in their thinking. Romans 8, the flesh or the spirit, hostile or submissive. They didn't understand biblical submission. Their fear opened the door to rebellion. They wanted to go back into bondage. They wanted to go back to the old way of waging war and being a prisoner. And it's all in the mind. Joshua and Caleb pled with the people. Numbers 14, verse 8, if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Isn't that the report they brought back first? When they demonstrated the fruit of the land, they said, yes, it's flowing with milk and honey, and God is going to give it to us. And verse 9, Caleb and Joshua say to them, and do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid. You see, fear opens the door to rebellion. And it causes us to exchange the truth for a lie, and then we become hostile in our relationship with God. In verse 18, Moses intercedes for the people. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the third and the fourth generation. And you might be like that tonight. There might be things in your life that you have tried so hard in the flesh to break. And you just can't seem to break it because it's generational. Just like me, I had to break generational curses in my life when I became a Christian. God answered Moses in verse 23, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt. You see, when we exchange the truth for a lie, we are treating God with contempt. You'll never see it. You'll never see the promise. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, in other words, he's in the spirit, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. And surely it took 40 years, but 40 years later, Caleb took the mountain that God promised to him because he had a different spirit. He wasn't in the flesh. He didn't have the mindset of a slave or a prisoner. He was a full-on spirit-led person. He had a different spirit. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children, that you would have taken them as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. You see, what are we going to choose tonight? A different spirit or contempt? We're going to choose to live by the flesh, or we're going to choose to live by the spirit? Are we going to be rebellious, or are we going to be submissive to the Spirit of God? Now, that's talking about generational things. What about me personally? How do I view myself? Do I view myself as a child of God or as a grasshopper? Am I a saint or a slave? What are you tonight? Romans 1:25 says that they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. Now, take the word I and insert it. And ask yourself the question, when have I exchanged the truth about God for a lie? Because any stronghold that I have in my brain, whether conscious or unconscious, even the way that I grew up in it, I grew up in all these godless myths and wives' tales, I had to confess them, I had to renounce them, and I had to begin to declare the truth about God.